Hello, Mary. I'm back again this week. So we're going to confuse the audience again today because we're turning the tables once again. As many of our audience members know, you usually host Care Dimensions, Timing is Everything. And I'm always on the other side in the background, kind of in the dark. People like to keep me hidden. But today, Mary thought I did such a great job the last time. And Mary did such a great job the last time that we thought we'd turn the tables again. And then I would be the host, and Mary would be the person being interviewed. And for today's program, which is called Exploring the Concepts of Hope at End of Life. But again, before we begin, Mary, because we might have some new people out there, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Lynn. And I like having you there. This is nice having you out in front of the camera.
I know someday we might be back in the same room together too. It's a little, I know, I liked it better when we were together, but this is much safer and we don't have to wear masks
right.
while we're talking to everybody.
That's right. We will definitely get there, right? It's not if, it's when, and we will get there and look forward to it. So, yeah, thank you so much. And so my name is Mary Crowe, as Lynn had mentioned, and I'm the Director of Professional and Community Education at Care Dimensions. And I've been with the organization for 15 years. And by profession, I'm a medical social worker. And most of my over 35-year career has been working with people with advanced illness or at end of life. So that's my story, Lynn. Yeah.
How long have you been here at Care Dimensions? Because you said 35 years. I don't think you've been here 35 years.
Not 35 years. I know, I look so young. So, I mean, it's startling to people. I've been in the field that long, but I've been with Care Dimensions. I'm going into my 15th, going into 15 years.
15 years, that's wonderful. Care Dimensions has been around, it's been over 40 years now. And, if our audience remembers, we started off as Hospice of the North Shore. And then as we grew and expanded, we became Hospice of the North Shore and Greater Boston. And then back in 2014, we became Care Dimensions because, you know what? As you and I know, we do so much more than hospice. Right. Now we're doing palliative care at home. We have our Home MD program, which is primary care at home. We do grief and bereavement services. And Mary Crowe does all our external education. So that gives us a little bit of it, telling about you and the company a little bit in the nutshell here.
Yeah.
But let's get on because this is such a great topic, Mary. So for, families and individuals facing an advanced illness or end of life, people don't understand, and I didn't until I started in hospice too, that how hope can factor into these times that it can be very stressful times for people.
Absolutely, Lynn. And this idea or this concept of hope is quite elusive, isn't it? It's something that people just don't think about when you're talking about advanced illness or end of life, but it's very much there. And they've done a lot of research around hope because, again, even there, it's even hard to define. They've studied this vehicle of hope, and what they found is that, hope is a process, Lynn. It doesn't, it's not a one-time thing. This is a process that happens and unravels. And, this concept of hope too, it's really underappreciated and undervalued. But boy, what they have found is how much this matters. And I certainly have seen this because, a large piece of my work in medical social work has been doing direct patient care too. And I have seen this in my direct practice. This concept of hope is very real and it matters a great deal and more than most people can imagine.
And when you're talking about end of life, you're not just talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, that hope isn't just about hoping for a cure, hoping to feel better. It's so much more than that, right?
Oh, it sure is. It's, that is the first thing that comes to mind, right? And of course, people hope for a cure, that they're going to recover or do well, that sort of thing. But, I just want to, kind of focus a little bit more on this hope thing because, hope is very dynamic. It has these changing qualities to it. And when they're really trying to find a consensus about what the definition of hope is, they have found that it's really futile because hope is really multidimensional in terms of the nature and the concept of this. So, it is a fundamental part of our human nature, though. It's very much there in all of us. And it is experienced by all people, regardless of age or culture or, place of origin, ethnicity, any of that, that it's really experienced by all people. And it just has many different meanings for people. And I certainly see that it brings out a whole new meaning for people, certainly at end of life. But hope changes too. As disease progression changes, so does hope, Lyn.
I can imagine. And Mary, and I'm going to kind of throw a curveball, but as you're talking about hope, and I'm thinking about what's going on with the pandemic also.
Yeah.
You have people that are at end of life, that are struggling with an advanced illness, and now might not be able to see their loved ones or be surrounded by people that that have cared for them or loved them for their entire life. So I would think there's the hope on both sides, the hope to be able to see that loved one before they pass, and the hope that the loved one has for reuniting with people or being with people that they that they are so close with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you can see again how hope becomes redefined, doesn't it? It is multidimensional here again. Who would have thunk it, Lyn? Right? When you're looking back several months ago, did we ever think that we would be in this predicament? I mean, not in a million years did we ever imagine that this was something that everybody in the world would be going through. And I think that this brings a whole host of other issues. I always say that the word that comes to mind for me, and that I hear time and time again from people, is the concept of uncertainty. And then there's on so many different levels, the level of uncertainty. And one of that too, like you're talking about, is for people at end of life, and people aren't able to do what they would ordinarily do. And when they have somebody at end of life or with an advanced illness, being at bedside, doing the things that they might have been able to do ordinarily. And here we are right now on an uptick, right? When there's we're in another phase of this, which is a really crisis point, and it is affecting people in a number of ways. You were talking about this cure thing, Lyn, and I want to go back to that if I may. Hope for a cure is something that individuals, I like to call them individuals rather than patients, because these are people that we're dealing with, right? So I often don't say the word patients, but it's, this is a person and certainly healthcare providers. This concept of a cure is like their best friend, right? This is something certainly that is hoped for. And sometimes what happens though is that, healthcare providers even, they avoid discussing, a person's prognosis with them out of fear that they might destroy hope. And that's a hard thing, right? Because they worry about what is the impact this would have on that individual. But you know what? And we've seen this, right, Lyn, in our work here with hospice and palliative care, is people with serious illness, they usually want to hear the truth. They want their physicians to tell them so that they understand the facts about their illness and all of that. So, what happens is when people have an advanced illness or they're at end of life, that hope for a cure eventually has to give way, right? If a cure is not the possibility, it eventually does give way to grief, because dying cannot ultimately be prevented, right? Nobody has ever gotten out of this world alive yet, and it isn't, right? So eventually it's something that people will do. So it's important that clinicians reveal the truth in a timely manner, in an honest way, in a compassionate manner, so that they can engage with them constructively around their grief, and replacing what can really be unrealistic hopes. See, that's a whole other, right? False or unrealistic hopes, from recovery, with something that's more profound, Lyn, and a more resilient kind of hope. And that's really what can happen when we're telling the truth.
And everything that you're just saying there, Mary, I'm thinking, oh, palliative care, oh, hospice. When you're saying clinicians talking to individuals and their family members about their prognosis, about their chances of survival, about their chances of a cure, or where their disease process is going and how, the track it's going to take. Our clinicians, from Care Dimensions, especially, I'm going to say on both sides, from palliative care and hospice, but if, people aren't quite at that hospice stage, our community palliative care nurse practitioners and doctors, this is what they're experts at. This is what they go out and do. They go and have those conversations with patients, with individuals. I'm gonna now be confused because I want to say patients, you want to say individuals, but
no, it's correct to say it.
Yeah. That's right. That they're going out and talking with them and being, hopeful in that they can enjoy their last months, year of life, pain-free, surrounded by family members, knowing what's coming up. And I would think that would add peace of mind for people too, knowing the truth and knowing what's going to happen. And not to say that physicians, specialists, office nurses and all are not telling them the truth, but I think these are lengthy conversations. These are delicate conversations, and having them done in the comfort of your own home by a palliative care nurse practitioner at our patient's pace and our family members' pace, I think sometimes works better too.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think it's, it's a nice added support for individuals and nice education for them too.
You're right. And I think you hit it right on the nail. These are skilled conversations. These are, one of the physicians who specializes in palliative care had mentioned that these skilled conversations, they're as skilled as any medical procedure that you'll do. And you're right in that not all physicians are skilled in this area. They don't know. These are very delicate, very skilled conversations, and palliative care this is their wheelhouse, if you will, and this is where, and I love that because it does foster hope. And it's not giving false hope, but what it does is when palliative care talking with people about their illness and what are the treatment options and what are the benefits and the burdens. And most importantly, Lyn, and this is the piece that I just think it's valued so much for palliative care, is what are your priorities? And how do we align the treatment approach to your priorities? So you're getting to what matters most to the individual. And I think palliative care shines in that regard.
Oh, they do. And that's their focus. And if you think about it, one last thing before we get back to, the different types of hopes that you want to discuss. But, people, physicians, they specialize. You have surgeons, you have cardiologists, you have respiratory physicians. Palliative care is a specialized division of healthcare, and you need to have the experience and the education in order to have those conversations. And that's what our palliative care team, or any palliative care team, is really specialized in those conversations. So
absolutely. I always say to people, Lyn, the minute that if I or a loved one was diagnosed with a serious illness, the first call I would make is to palliative care. And I might have that conversation with them just around, again, unraveling that picture and looking towards the future. And listen, it might be a time before that conversation comes up again throughout the disease unravels, but that would be the first call. And then how they could be involved at various times of the disease progression. Palliative care is, again, invaluable in that way.
They are, but we're gonna, because we kind of go off. That's what Mary and I do. We're really going to go off the topic a little bit, so we're going to reel it back in. And Mary, can you tell our audience a little bit about the different types of hope?
Yeah. And what's interesting, Lyn, we're not really off topic, right? It all ties together. It really does. And we are talking about hope. Even when we're talking and going off into that palliative care realm, we are talking about hope. There are different types. And, this doctor, Brad Stewart, talks about these different types. There's a focused and an intrinsic type of hope. And I can really see this in that, like a focused type of hope is the kind of hope that, the physicians and the patients depend on, right? When they are hoping and when there is a cure or a recovery from a disease process. But when patients or individuals begin treatments, they certainly do hope to recover from that. And they always maintain that desire for a positive outcome. But when you hold on to that expectation, when a cure is no longer possible, that can be detrimental, right? Because that can actually lead to people or clinicians offering up treatments that are no longer effective and that actually can detract from quality of life, right? And they can be toxic or costly or really detract from quality of life. So, really that's what focused hope is, Lyn. It's when you're focused around that goal and generally around that cure. But what happens when, when that's not possible is that people individuals will go into what's called an intrinsic hope. And this intrinsic hope, and this is why I say what we were just talking about is very relevant, because this is what I feel that palliative care does too, is it focuses on the intrinsic hope. And intrinsic hope is a part of the human condition, right? It allows us to really come to terms or be at peace with our circumstances that we're dealing with, and helps us to live in the moment, which is so important. Intrinsic hope also, it focuses on what are the things that are most important. Right? Now we're not even looking at a cure because that's no longer possible. But what are the things that are subjectively to us or personally, what is it that's most important to us? And it's interesting to watch that because people sometimes put things off, Lyn, or they have things that are that are really important. There's much more to hope for than just a cure. And people do this all the time at end of life. So, so we have to look at that. What is behind it? What is it that brings somebody peace? What is it that they want to accomplish or what makes them happy? That's intrinsic hope. People can experience both focused and intrinsic at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive, but eventually what happens is, again, people are going to approach somebody. This is a paradoxical thing that happens for people. Intrinsic hope grows, right? It emerges as our inner life grows. And this again talks about when that prognosis is poor, or when things are not, there's no hope for a cure, people are going to grieve. They are going to grieve that. Of course, it's just a natural thing. But what happens is that then there's a focus on, again, what is really important. What is it that you want left? What can be done with the time that you have left? And that's all about intrinsic hope, Lyn.
I would think that everybody's journey to intrinsic hope would be a little different too, because some people are going to fight right to the bitter end and look for that, that cure, that focused hope, the cure right until the very end. And others might come to terms with it a little bit quicker. And does it also depend on how your family takes the news too? Like if they're accepting of it and, not saying, oh, let's try, but, kind of focusing on what's important at the moment. Is that so? Everybody's journey must be so totally different.
Oh, absolutely. And I also think that, as you said, there are other people involved in this process with you. Certainly the individual is at the center point, but how your loved ones around you, how they help you through that process, how they come to terms with the process. And also, again, as you had just mentioned, your healthcare providers. See, this again is where truth telling, and I know that we come to healthcare, right? We want to fix things, Lyn. We want to make it better, and we can't always fix things. I do believe we can make it better, but it doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily cure it. But what's important is that we can't always fix things, and I think sometimes we're trying to, we look at death as a failure when it's actually the natural order of things. And I think that's hard. So sometimes you have clinicians not telling the truth out of fear that they're going to take that hope away from somebody, when truth telling does not eliminate hope, Lyn. It doesn't at all, but it helps people, it helps hope to evolve to actually a much deeper level. And that's what's important. There's a saying, and I love it. You know that saying, don't just stand there, do something.
Yeah.
Well, in this situation, the saying is, don't just do something, stand there. Right? So I love it. Don't just do something, stand there. So in other words, again, there's not always something to be done in that way. And one of the things that we can do that is most important to the person is being present, to really being there with the individual, right?
Always talked about listening and being present.
Oh, there's nothing more important in my eyes, Lynn, because I don't think we do it enough. And, I think that this sense of being and being present, that this is what helps people in terms of this intrinsic hope and really, shedding light on its relevance and important and what is most important to that individual. This is not just about the individual state of being, right? But it also has to do with the work that the clinician's doing with the individual too, right? And being able to be present with them. And I think as hard as it is when we feel like we can't, fix things, to be there with that individual through their disease process, I think that that's something that is invaluable. And
I'm going to bring up our teams again too, and especially during this pandemic, what I have seen, when people are not being allowed in with their loved ones, that the hospice teams, our hospice teams, are actually the eyes and ears for the family members. They're going in, caring for their loved ones, and then they're the communication back to the family members and letting them know what's going on and taking them on the journey, even though they're not there at bedside. Whether it be FaceTiming and putting them on the phone at the same time or just giving them updates, but it's keeping that family, close to the situation and everybody connected.
Absolutely.
I think is so important at end of life.
Yeah, and it is. That connection is so important, so critical to people. And I think that, again, we all have that capacity. So that's why I say we can make things, we might not be able to cure the illness, but we can certainly make things better in the process. And those are some of the ways that you do it.
And there's so many people that come on to hospice, that they come on to palliative care. And of course, everybody's afraid of the word hospice because what does it mean? It means that someone has a terminal illness. But you know what? It's that added layer of support. And there's so many families that will reach back out to us afterwards and say, you know what? This was the best service that we could have had. And I wish we came on earlier. Yeah. We could have gotten, more accomplished in a way from a spiritual standpoint, from a grief standpoint, from a connection standpoint, with the whole team that works in hospice, from the social workers to the chaplains to the nurses. So it really is, it's a huge benefit. And it just goes hand in hand what you're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're saying that people, through up to end of life is still going to have hopes and goals, right? And
absolutely. Like I said, there's a lot to hope for at this stage of life that we call end of life. And, and again, cure aside, right? That there's hope for comfort and for dignity, for intimacy, for time with the loved ones, families, friends, time to finish unfinished business, to reconcile, make amends. There is a lot of work to do, Lynn, at this stage of life. This is not a passive process. This is really, there's a lot to do and a lot to hope for at this stage. And like I said, what happens is that hope doesn't end, it becomes redefined. So you can see there's a great deal to hope for, and it's really important that people understand what happens for people at end of life, and sometimes I think people in the general society, they don't understand. So we kind of isolate people, we kind of, in a sense, ostracize them a speck, but people go through a lot of distress in other ways, and some of that is fear of abandonment. And sometimes we do even socially isolate people because it's hard for us to be with somebody who's dying or to not knowing what to say, things like that. But there's a lot of loss and things that people experience, their loss of their family roles or even, their occupational roles, things like that, that there's a lot of things that people experience in that. But, when people, after they get through the initial anguish of hearing that terminal diagnosis, again, a lot of times things kind of focus on the people that are most important. And they really prioritize what is most important to them. And they're looking for what is the meaning? Where is the meaning attached to life? And it focuses more on that time, the quality time, Lynn, rather than the length of time that they have to live. Is, what is important to them for that remaining period. And that's very important. We can bolster hope As healthcare providers, and even as family members, Lynn, you had mentioned the family's very much involved here. And the way we do that is just by valuing the individual, appreciating that person's value, the person who is dying, strengthening, reconciling, as I mentioned, these relationships, and even looking at, you had mentioned spirituality earlier, the spiritual matters that come up. This is an important time for people to explore that. Another way too is making sure we've got to control symptoms, right? Pain and other symptoms. And regardless of what the symptoms are, it could be shortness of breath or anxiety or so many different things that can happen. But if we don't control the symptoms, Lynn, we can't even get at the other stuff. See, there's so much focus on that. And if somebody is in that type of distress, how do you tend to all of these other things that people can be working on at this precious time of life?
And how can the individual even focus on anything except their pain and their discomfort? And again, that's, palliative care and hospice. I can't say it enough. That's their expertise, getting that pain and those symptoms under control. So you can hope for that quality. You can hope, for, that the time with your loved ones at the end. When you said hope is bolstered by, I want to just bring it up again, but people have to listen. People have to listen to what people, what the person with the terminal illness really wants. You see it, and I'd be the same if it was, my parent. I'd be pushing and pushing, but to stop and listen and really take stock in what the individual wants at that point, I think is very important.
Yeah.
And I know if people have heard our podcast, I know I'm always one to throw a quote out there, but Mary, I came across what I think is a good quote for this episode. It's from Johns Hopkins Medical Center, which, is world renowned. Everybody knows them, but they say, by focusing on small everyday hopes, it lets patients know that hope is about them, not their medical outcome.
Yeah, very good.
Hope is about the individual.
Yeah. Very good. I'm going to tell you, I think it really drives what we've been talking about today, Homeland, is that I think there can be so much focus on things that are not within our control, but when we do focus on what's most important to that individual, I think that it's the greatest gift of all. It's and just going back to what you said again, just hospice and palliative care, they do focus on this. They help around, just again the strain and the tensions around that, just letting go of that possibility for a cure and getting and understanding the disease process, or making sure again that the person doesn't feel isolated or lonely, and just helping loved ones to move, and to have a dignified death, to focus on that. And the families are such a big part of this. Families have their own complicated needs, their fears and burdens and stressors, and the family dynamics that go on. And what I love about hospice and palliative care is it's not just about the individual, it's about the whole system, all that love and support you, and they bolster them as well.
That's very true, Mary. And I know, this time always flies by, and I know we're coming up at the end of our segment. Is there, this was such an important topic, Mary, and I know any of our topics, we could go on and on for days, but is there any last minute information you want to share, or should we, No,
I want people to understand, Lynn, that again, hope continues. Hope, even for people with advanced illness or end of life, hope continues, but it becomes different. It becomes redefined. And it's really important that we help and support people through that process.
That's right, Mary. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And it's, as usual, it's been a pleasure speaking and getting this information out to our audience. We thank you also.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Home. More than ever, it's your sanctuary. But if you're caring for a loved one with advanced illness, it can feel isolating and worrisome. Care Dimensions can help. As Massachusetts' leading hospice provider, you can count on us for guidance, medical care, and support. We follow all COVID-19 safety precautions to protect you and your family, so you don't have to delay getting the care you need. Visit Care Dimensions online or give us a call.